at work in all of that. So with all of that, though, we will make our way through Exodus 34 through 40. I don't know if y'all know who Jose Canseco is, but Jose Canseco was a baseball player. Played with the Oakland Athletics in like the late 80s, 90s kind of time period. Was big in kind of the steroid scandal that happened with baseball. And kind of one of the things, like if you're just a generic sports fan, one of the things that Jose Canseco is known for is a home run that was hit off of his head. And so you can YouTube, if you YouTube Jose Canseco, this will probably be one of the top things that pops up there. And so I can't remember who they were playing. Like I just remember the clip. And so someone, unknown to me, hits the ball all the way to the track in the outfield, right? So if you know a baseball field, right, the last few feet turns to dirt. If you don't know why that is, just to give you a little extra, the reason it turns to dirt is so that way fielders know that they're getting close to the wall and not to run into it. So he gets to the dirt. He's looking up to catch the ball. He jumps, totally whiffs, misses the ball. The ball hits off of his head, which is not in field. So it hits off of his head, goes over the fence for a home run. Had he just not been there, it would have been a double. But because of his amazing baseball skills, he managed to get this person a home run. Well, that is kind of us in this story. Is God does things through unusual means all the time. And he works through people who really have no business being worked through. And God finds a way to use me, I'll just keep it to myself, uses me as a hard-headed, stubborn person to run out to the outfield and hit a home run off of my head every now and then. And so what we're seeing at this point is kind of the final turn in the book. That these people have rebelled, they've pressed, God has desired to use them, God has desired to make them a people of his own possession, and they've continued to mess it up the whole time. And finally, we get to this point, they've had the golden calf, Moses has come, he's mediated on behalf of the people, and we finally get here and God says, okay, you're no good, but I'm still going to find a way to work through you. I'm still going to work through you to do things that you would have never expected to do. And really what we've been seeing in this whole time is that God is at work despite the people. Despite all the things that they're doing, God is still working. And God is still in pursuit of his people. Kind of as you think about kind of a stamp on this whole book, really, you could turn to chapter 34, verses 8 and 9, and kind of Moses' kind of response to God at this point, right? So Moses immediately knelt low on the ground and worshipped. And then he said, "My Lord, if I have indeed found favor with you, my Lord, please go with us. Even though this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our iniquity and sin, and accept us as your own possession." Right? That from the very beginning of the book, God has been at work for this purpose, to finally establish the people of Israel as his people that are then going to be a light among the nations. Even though they are a stiff-necked and rebellious people, God is still desiring to be at work through them. And so what we're going to see today is that God covenants with broken people. People who have no business being in a covenant with God, but yet God has decided to be in a covenant with them. And really what we've seen over these last few chapters is not a story of a people who are rebellious and then God's judgment on them. What we've really seen now is a story of a rebellious people who receive the amazing grace and forgiveness of God. And that because of God's amazing grace and forgiveness, the people now get used in an amazing way. Not because of who they are. God has not chosen them because they're some special people out of all people, but God has chosen them because of his grace, because of his desire to work through them. And we're now kind of going to wrap up this full picture of who God is and what it means for the people of Israel to be his people. and what it means for God to covenant with a broken people. And the first thing in this passage that we see is that God's covenant displays His character. His covenant does not display the character of the people or anybody else. His covenant displays His character. And you see this right before the section that we read in verses 5 through 7. All right, so God has just told Moses to go back and recut the stones, the 2 stone tablets that were busted, kind of the sign of the covenant. So go back, recut them, reestablish the covenant. And on what basis is He doing that? Verse 5, the Lord came down in a cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed His name, the Lord. And the Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations and forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But He will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing their father's iniquity on children and grandchildren to the 3rd and 4th generation. And so what God is saying is, hey, to those who will turn to me, I am a gracious and loving God who is slow to anger. And that is the foundation of my covenant with these people. This covenant is about the God who makes the covenant, not the people who He makes it with. It's a sign of who He is in the story. And don't miss that this is God's story. Right? So often we get stuck in mindset that we read the story and we try to find ourselves in it. Or we try to find what God says about the people in it. But the story is really about Him. And if you miss that the story is about Him, everything else gets distorted. And so you just think about either your favorite movie or book or story of any general type, right? Most stories have a hero of some type and a villain of some type. And if you mix up who those 2 characters are, it changes the story a lot. Happy stories turn into sad stories, right? So think of Rocky, right? We'll stick with sports metaphors so far for today. All right, if you've ever seen the movie Rocky, and we'll fast forward to Rocky 4, which is where he fights, I just blanked on the guy's name, the Russian. And so he's fighting the Russian, he's getting ready to go to the fight. Right? If you thought the Russian guy was the hero in the story and not Rocky, when Rocky wins at the end, it's not a happy story anymore, right? And so if you miss that this is a story about who God is, that God is displaying His character, that it's not a story about the people are only involved secondarily, right? It's about God's work being displayed, about Him displaying who He is. And so don't miss that important fact, because that changes kind of the story as we see it, right? That's how we end up looking at these chapters and saying, oh, see, look how judging God is. Look how all this people is all about their rebellion, all about their judgment. Well, it's not. It is. They did rebel. There is a judgment that did fall on them. God is holy and just, right? That's the second half of this. Right? But it also shows a God who is amazingly at work in people who continue to not get it right. And why is that so important, that God is at work in the midst of people who don't get it right? Because no matter what you think of yourself, that is still you. We still don't get it right. We still mess up the story over and over and over and over again. And so the story can't be about us and the things we're doing. The story has to be about God and what He is doing. About Him putting all of His glory on display. That people will see a just, kind, merciful, and loving God who's at work in the midst of a people who did not get it right. And the importance of God's name in this chapter is that this has been the sign of their salvation from the beginning. As soon as the Lord came and talked to Moses, right, this is what He said. This is who I am, and this is the sign to you that I'm going to do what I've said I'm going to do. And so now we're reaching the end of the book, and God is pointing back to that same reality. And now just giving a fuller picture of I am the Lord who is going to save you, and I am the Lord who is going to save you because I am a faithful, loving, and gracious God to those who will turn to me. Now, there is the flip side of the story. right? That to those who do not turn to him, right? That there is judgment that is still coming on them, that they will not go unpunished, right? Kind of think from the beginning of the book, the continued juxtaposition of Pharaoh and God, right? That those who continue to live out what Pharaoh did, the continued rebellion of saying, no, it is my way, not your way. I'm going to do it the way that I want because I'm in control. To those who continue to press against him, there is a punishment that's going to come. But for those who turn, God is faithful and abounding in grace to 1,000 generations. Essentially, kind of this picture of forever. That his grace has no end to those who will pursue it. It's just up to those who will, right? If you will choose to pursue and chase after him. And so God is closing the book all the way back from where he began it. That this story is about my great name and about me displaying who I am, not just to the Israelites, but to the whole world. And never forget that God's story is bigger than your story. And that is both a challenge and an encouragement. That there is not, if God could save these people, God can save anybody. And if you want other examples, just keep reading. There's lots of people in here, all of them with the exception of one, who mess it up time and time and time and time again. And so our story is not bigger than his. His story can overcome anything in our life. No matter how far we have tried to run from him, no matter how much we have tried to rebel and press against him, there's nothing in our story that can overcome his. Because to those who will turn, he will be gracious to 1,000 generations. So it's an encouragement in that sense. It's also a challenge in another sense if you cannot make more of yourself than you should. The story's not about you, and it's not about me. It's about him. And if I begin to pursue what I want and the things that I desire, I end up in the wrong place. Moses is the key example of that story, right? If you just keep reading through the Pentateuch, that's kind of what ultimately kind of gets him to mess it all up. Right? It's not about me, it's about him. And it's a constant reminder to submit myself to him, to not let myself rule my life, but to allow him to rule my life. And he will be kind and gracious in that, because that is who he is. So God's covenant displays his character. It also displays that he is at work in and through people. That even though the story is about him, that he has invited people to be involved in his story, to be a part of what he is doing in the world. Or as you continue your way through chapter 34, right, all the way down to verse 10, and the Lord responded. So Moses makes his last plea that they will be his possession. All right, and the Lord responded, I am making a covenant. I will perform wonders in the presence of all your people that have never been done before in the whole earth or in any nation. And all the people you live among will see the Lord's work. For what I am doing with you is awe-inspiring. Right? That he's going to do such a work in the midst of them that the rest of the world is going to take notice. That they are going to see him at work if they will simply turn and submit to him, be distinct from the rest of the world so that God's character can be on display. That as people look to the nation of Israel, they don't just simply see Israel, but they see this kind, gracious, loving, just, holy God. And its distinction among the people is him. That they see something unique in the people that makes them say how great their God is. Again, not how great they are, but how great the God they serve is. That God has done things in their life and in their midst that would have never been comprehended. And that all they see is Him. And so you can almost think of your life as a chameleon, which is the craziest of animals in my opinion, right? Whatever is behind it, right? Whatever it is attached to, right? It conforms to that. People do the same thing. The things that feed into our life, the things that are important to us, the things that we desire, the things that we pursue, will influence who we are. It will influence the way people see us. It'll influence the way we do. It'll influence how we act in the world. And the question before the people of Israel, and the question still before the church today, is, what is that going to be? Are you going to be shaped in a reflection of the character of God, or are you going to be shaped in a reflection of the people around you? When people look into your life, what do they see? Do they see you and the world around you, or do they see a God at work in you? To continue to reflect the things that God is doing, because God is doing an amazing work through the people. God is doing things that no one would have ever thought possible. And that's why your testimony is so important. To be able to reflect back and say, this is who I was, but Christ changed me. But Christ did something different in my life. Who I am today is not because of me, but because of God's work in me. That the most awe-inspiring work that God ever did was to redeem people through His Son, indwell them with the Holy Spirit, and make them a new creation. Something only He could do. So as the world looks to the church, they see a distinct people. A people who have been changed by what God is doing. And that those people are involved in the work that God is doing. So as you work your way through, we're going to jump to chapter 35, and we're going to go all the way down to verse 20. Right? And so like they've been at work, they're starting to build, the tabernacle is getting constructed. Right? Then the entire Israelite community left Moses present. So Moses has just been giving them kind of final instruction. And everyone whose heart was moved and whose spirit was prompted, and the Spirit prompted him, came and brought an offering to the Lord for the work of the tent of the meeting and for all of its services and the holy garments. Both men and women came. All who had willing hearts brought brooches, earrings, rings, necklaces, and all kinds of gold jewelry. Everyone who presented a presentation offering of gold to the Lord, and then kind of talks about how they continue to go on and be used in some other ways, right? That the whole community was involved. Not just Moses, not just leadership, not just some people, but everybody who was willing. And that is an important piece. Right? That everyone who was stirred by God came and said, hey, I want to be a part of what is happening here. I see God moving. I've seen God up on this mountain for, at this point, somewhere between like 60 and 100 something days. Right? Moses has been up and down the mountain multiple times. Right? We skipped over the radiant face. We'll come back to that later. Right? There's been all of this stuff that's been happening. And they've said, if this is who God is, I want in. I want to be involved. And that invitation was given to the entire community of people. For all those who were willing to be engaged. And that's a challenging statement, right? Are we willing to be involved in what God is doing? When we see the hand of God at work, does that prompt us and move us to be involved and be engaged? Not because of what we can get out of it, but simply because of the blessing of being involved in what God is doing. The blessing of being used by Him. The blessing of being part of something bigger than what we are. The blessing of being a part of God's proclamation to the nations then and God's proclamation to the nations now. And that we willingly come and we say, God, I want in because of all the wonderful things that you are doing. I've seen your hand at work in my life. I've seen your hand at work around me. I want your hand to be at work through me. And there is something powerful when God uses you in the life of someone else. And you may get nothing tangible out of that. But it is still amazing when God says, no, I'm going to use you to touch this person's life. When I'm going to allow you to be involved in my mission. Now, unfortunately, you can decide not to be willingly involved. While the invitation went out to all the community, that all the community was in Moses' presence, all the community heard this, but only those who were willing came back. You can come and enjoy every Sunday. You can hear good worship. You can hear an okay sermon. You can have some good fellowship. On days that Lori brings food, you can definitely have some good snacks. But you can miss out on the most important thing. To be engaged in what God is doing. But to be engaged in what God is doing is about more than Sunday. It's about being engaged in what God is doing throughout the church. And that does look different for everybody, right? That's not to say, oh, everybody needs to come to this thing and that thing and be involved in this ministry and that ministry. But it does mean you need to be involved somewhere. It does mean you need to be engaged somewhere. That your involvement in church is not simply about coming and getting what you can get, but it's about coming and being engaged in what God is doing. Because God is doing amazing things. And there's a true blessing in that. But God is at work not simply in one person or two people, but God is at work in and through a community of people. That is all people come, right? As we as a church engage, that is a stronger witness to the things that God is doing. It is not simply about me or the deacons or the ministry leaders. It's about us as a church being a reflection of God to the people around us, to the communities that we live in, to the workplaces that we go, to the grocery stores that we shop at. That our lives are a continued reflection of Him. That He's doing amazing things, right? Remember, we're just Jose Canseco out there in the middle of right field not knowing what the heck's going on, right? But allowing God to be at work in us. Being open and available for God to use us, even when we're not necessarily ready for it. To be looking for opportunities for Him to be at work. And don't forget, right? God is the one at work. It's not about you. And where we see that again is when you jump down chapter 35 and jump down to verse 30. All right, and then Moses said to the Israelites, all right, so they've come, they've brought all their stuff, they're getting ready to build the tabernacle, right? But it's still not on them. Look, the Lord has appointed by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. He has filled him with God's Spirit, with wisdom and understanding, ability, and every kind of craft to design artistic works in gold and silver and bronze, to cut gemstones for mounting, and to carve wood for work in every kind of artistic craft. He has also given both him and Elelbabib, the son of Ashimech, the tribe of Dan, the ability to teach others. He has filled them with skill to do work of a gem cutter, a designer, an embroiderer in purple and gold and scarlet yarn, fine linen, and weave. And they can do every kind of craft, design, artistic design. So see, like he said, hey, go build this. Be engaged. To all those who are willing, come and be a part of it. And not only that, I'm going to equip you to do the work that I have for you. Don't worry if you're not the best speaker. Don't worry if you don't have the skills. Don't worry if you don't know how to do this or how to do that, or if you don't think you can do this or if you don't think you can do that. I've given you what you need. I have called you. I have redeemed you out of your brokenness, and now I'm going to equip you to be used. And everybody's equipped. God is at work in your life through all the various things that you've done, all of the gifts, the talents, the training, whether they were just kind of God-given or whether they were earned through hard work and labor, you just kind of learned how to do stuff. God has equipped you with those things. Are you using them for Him? Or maybe God's calling you sometimes out of your comfort zone. David shouldn't have been a king. There was nothing in his life that indicated he should be a king. Peter shouldn't have been a leader of anybody. He could barely catch fish. Right? But Peter used him. And so don't put limits around God in that sense either. That, okay, I'll be used, but only in the talents and the gifts that I have. Well, maybe that's what God's calling you to. Maybe God is calling you to use the talents and the gifts that you have and you've developed over years. But also, maybe God's calling you to be used in a way you would have never, ever thought. But even in that circumstance, it's still, you don't have to worry about, oh, well, I don't know the words, or I don't know this, or I don't know that. It's Him. If God's going to call you to it, God's going to give you a way through it. Right? Because He is going to equip you to do the task that is at hand. Right? Because you don't think God, before we ever got here, right? Before we ever got to the end of Exodus, God knew who these people were. God knew they were stiff-necked and rebellious. God knew they were going to find every opportunity they could to do the wrong thing. They were never going to do the right thing. God knew, but God still said, I can use you. God knew everything about your life. And God knows everything about your life that is still to come. And God is saying, I'm inviting you to be used. I'm inviting you to be a part of my story. Stop making your life bigger than what I can do. I can do whatever I need to do in your life to accomplish my task. If you will come, and I will display my works through you. Because it is about Him and it is not about us. God covenants with a broken people, displaying His character, being at work through them, despite them, all for one purpose. That His covenant is about His presence with His people. That He has from the beginning, right? That did not start in Exodus. That started in Genesis 1. And it goes until Revelation, right? From beginning to end, God's work has been to say, I desire to be with you. I desire to be in your presence, or vice versa, right? That you would be in His. And He's coming at this point, He's saying, look, despite your rebellion, I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to call you to be used. I'm going to equip you. And then I'm going to come and dwell in your presence. Think about the powerful picture that happens in chapter 40. All of this stuff is going on. The people were afraid to go up the mountain because of all of the stuff that was happening on the mountain. They were like, Moses, you go. Because then if we get zapped dead, it's just you. We're okay. So you go, right? And all of the stuff happening on the mountain goes from the mountain to the people in the tabernacle. The cloud goes off the mountain, descends, and comes in the presence of the people. That despite all of the things they had done, God's mission was accomplished. Despite all of the things that the Egyptians did, God's mission was accomplished. That God's presence ended with His people. And that God's presence does powerful things in the people's midst. That is the thing that makes them distinct throughout all people. Moses is a reflection of that. Right? What happens in chapter 35? When Moses is before the Lord, he spends all this time with him, his actual appearance changes. And the people are afraid of that too. The people are always afraid of what God is doing. And yet God continues to say, come. I want you to be in my presence. I want to make you my possession. I want you to see a glimpse of who I am. I want you to catch hold of what I could do in your life if you would simply come. That I desire you. All your faults, all the things in your life that don't go right, all the times in your life you've tried to rebel, all the wrong things you've done, God still says, I want you to be in my presence. And there's nothing in your life too big to overcome it. No circumstance, no thing that you've done, and I will change you, and I will guide you and lead you, right? That God's presence at this point forward, right, is the thing that guides the people of Israel. When the cloud descends on the tabernacle, what do? They stay. When the cloud ascends, they tear everything up and they go. It's the guiding principle of the people forever from this point forward, right? God's presence with them. That God is at work in their midst, guiding them and leading them through His very presence with them. Displaying His glory to the nations. Marking them as distinct because they are being guided and led by God Himself. Our job today is to still be guided and led through the work of the Holy Spirit in our life. To allow God to do amazing things. If we will simply submit to Him and come before Him and say, no, it is a story about you and it is not a story about me. Let you run everything. And that's a scary thing. It is scary to come before God and say, you know what, God, you have all of it. Because we feel like at that point in time, I'm out of control. What if God calls me to do something I don't want to do? What if God calls me to give up something I don't want to give up? Trust me, whatever you're going to get at the end is going to be better than whatever you're called to or whatever you have to give up in the middle of it. And even the journey, though difficult and challenging, will be worth it because God Himself will be with you. Doesn't mean it'll always be easy. God calls people to some hard things. Read Hebrews 10. Right? God calls some people to some hard things. I have zero desire in my life to be sawn in two. Right? That's not a goal that I have now or ever. Right? But I do understand God might call me to some hard things. God might call me to give up some things I would rather not give up. Whether those be sins that I desire to hold on to, and God says, come and lay that at the cross. Or whether that be good things that I just assigned the wrong place to, and God says, stop putting your comfort in those things. The question before me, do I desire His presence more than I desire anything else? Will I allow His presence to be the guiding principle of my life? And you may not think, well, I don't have a guiding principle in my life. Yes, you do. Everybody does. Everybody has something they put at the top of the list and that everything else submits to. It may just be comfort, right? You may just say, I don't want to work hard. I want to sit around and watch TV, right? Okay. You'll sit around and you watch TV and you'll submit everything else to that, right? It may be money, friends, drugs, sex. It could be any number of things, right? Family, work, right? Everybody puts something at the top of the list. The question is, do you have the right thing at the top of the list? Is your desire for His presence to be at work in your life? And that's the question for everybody. Are you seeking God's presence? Are you just seeking the things that you want in life? Is it about Him and saying, no, He really is the number one thing? Is my desire really for Him? Is that really what I'm seeking? And that is not a simple yes or no for the rest of your life answer. That's a yes, now it's not. I'm doing a little better than I did last week. I'm doing a little worse. Right? You kind of go through this. And you constantly have to be coming back and saying, no, is God where He should be in my life? And so what does that mean for us, right? That means that I should be coming before God and say, God, reveal to me the places in my life where I'm seeking the wrong thing. Where my desire is for the wrong thing. Where my hope is in the wrong thing. Show me what those things are that I might guard myself against them. And those things are different for everybody. And so come before God and say, God, I desire that you would reveal to me the places that my heart is prone to stray. So that I can say, okay, I need to put a safeguard around this thing. Because when this thing gets too close to me, my heart strays from you. And I begin to seek the wrong thing, place my hope in the wrong thing, desire the wrong thing, think the wrong thing will fix my life. Seeking God is a lifelong journey. It has ups and downs in the midst of it. The importance of coming back to His presence over and over and over and over and over again. That our hearts grow a longing for Him more than other things. That we understand that He is the one who ultimately hears and delivers His people. It's what God said at the very beginning. I've heard my people's cry. And I'm going to come and redeem them out of the hand of Israel. That I may get to chapter 40 and come and dwell in their presence. God hears you and God will deliver you. And our promised land is not in this world, but our promised land is in the world to come. And we must continue to seek that. And our rebellion is never too big for Him. Because He is a gracious and loving God who is slow to anger to those who will turn to Him. But to those who are deserving of punishment. And what does it mean this side of the cross to be deserving of punishment? It means to reject the mercy and grace that God has provided in Christ. That all those who have placed faith in Christ aren't deserving of punishment because as God looks upon their life, He does not view their works, but He views the works of His Son. So the only ones deserving of punishment are those who have continued to reject what God has done in Christ. Who have continued to reject submitting their lives. Not simply that Christ is their Savior, but Christ saves them and then leads them. But He is Lord over them. But for all those who turn, right? No matter how dark the story, no matter how deep the hole, there is mercy and grace. Because that's how amazing God is. If God could be at work through them, God can be at work through you. To do amazing things that will make the nations say how great their God is.